I think we're going to have at least a couple different confederations that are going to come out of this. I think that's what America is going to look like. I think the coasts are going to be largely confederations. Although I think also some states are going to disappear. They're going to break up and become different things. Like Oregon, I don't think will stay together. Neither will California. Illinois won't stay together. Parts of Missouri are going to break off. Virginia, I think, is going to have some splitting going on. Washington State is definitely going to split. There's a lot of talk going on there right now. And so there's going to be a lot of splits. I mean, America is going to look very different. I think that's the only thing I can say with certainty. Within 10 years, America's political boundaries are going to look very, very different by the end of it.
America is divided because our powerful federal government pits red states against blue. We need to return power to the states and to the people by decentralizing. If that fails, we must be prepared for a peaceful national divorce or face a destructive civil war. Welcome to War, Divorce, or Federalism. America at a crossroads.
All right, today we have a fun episode. We've got two hosts, two guests, but only two people. And so we are looking at two podcasters dealing with roughly the same topic overall. And so we're going to introduce ourselves. Now, for the audience, war, divorce, or federalism. This is the idea that the United States is on a trajectory for one of three paths. And that is that we are headed for a national divorce, or if we are ill prepared for a national divorce, to a civil war. The third option, of course, is if we're going to avoid that, we would have to federalize or decentralize. And by decentralizing, we would calm the waters, if you will. We would allow for less polarization, more civil discourse. Those are all the topics we discuss. Usually it's a one-on-one interview, just like we have today. And Professor Wall, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, well, this is for me an episode of From Steel to Secession AM, which is a subsidiary podcast to Secession Speakeasy. And on Secession Speakeasy and From Steel to Secession AM and our soon to be coming out Tavern Roundtable, we are going to be discussing issues relating to rediscovering freedom in the world through basically we move from the stealing of our freedoms to a rebirth of freedom through secession. And because the elites don't want you to talk about this, these are forbidden topics, which makes this more of a speakeasy, but we engage in speakeasy of talk rather than drink. So, but that's basically what we talk about here. We go over these with people who are already thinking along these lines and we're all about, and we're huge on solutions here. We do acknowledge the problems in the world, but we're looking for solutions to the problems, not merely complaining about the problems. And we see in secession the key tool to accomplish decentralization, which we will believe will bring many, though not all, of the solutions to today's problems, along with an emphasis on keeping things as local as possible, keeping governance as local as possible to families, communities, local areas, the like. So that's what we have here with Secession Speakeasy and From Steel to Secession AM, although this is an episode of From Steel to Secession AM. So, and I have to say, I want to just quickly say thank you, Dr. Becker, for welcoming me on this podcast. I know I've been following your work for a long time, and it's a very great honor to speak with you on these issues here today. You have been a real beacon of freedom in the upper Great Plains of America to date.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So, Professor Wald, on my end, this is very new. You are episode number 5 for us, whereas you have a lot more under your belt. This is I would say, a very niche area to have these discussions, podcasts or otherwise. How long have you been going with these discussions?
Well, we started. I could say that my journey to this point really started with finding Ron Paul back in 2008. I discovered him at that time. I was still a student at the time that I discovered him, and I didn't completely agree with everything he said right at that moment. But I really liked the direction he was heading, and it really touched me. As it basically is like, what? It's like why? It's like, why does government dictate to me what I have to do? It's like, why can't I figure things out? It's like, and that built from there. I worked for the Ron Paul 2012 campaign in 3 different states as well when he ran again. But it gradually came across to me over time that the solutions that were being proposed, we weren't getting past the institutions, the institutional power. And that presented in my mind, I was like, okay, it's like, well, it's not enough to just sit here and complain. Do we have solutions here? What solutions do we have? Now, I will say, I went to school in the South, so I had people who brought the secession idea to my mind very early in my life, and including one, I've actually had him on my show a few times, a mentor of mine, Dr. Bernard Way, and he really pushed it with me and said that secession is completely compatible with America's principles. He said, after all, he said, what did the Founding Fathers do on July 4th, 1776? You know, so it was, but I wasn't really ready to go there until I realized that we weren't seeing any other way around it. I mean, we would try to get allies in to join, people like Rand Paul, Thomas Massey, Justin Amash, and the like, and we weren't seeming to get anywhere a lot, and we'd get so few in. And whereas at the state level, it seemed like we had more success, but it was still really much of a grind in some states. Growing up in Minnesota, I don't live there anymore, but I grew up there and I saw a lot of the problems there and how hard it was to just get people in who would actually apply common sense values. And so I said, okay, there has to be a way that the people can now step up and get these things done. And that gradually led me to secession. And finally, I began talking about it probably more around 2017, 2018, I think. I think that was when I really started to talk about it in my circle, in the circles of friends and so on. But in terms of actually getting out and presenting it publicly as an option, that really started to take off about 3 years ago now. A friend of mine, and he ended up being the co-founder of our podcast, Mr. Jason Green, he reached out to me, and we had gone to school together. And he said that he had come to the same conclusion, that basically this is the only way we were going to solve problems. And since we both thought along similar lines, I was like, why don't we actually, I said, we have all these alternative media podcasts. The alternative media seems to be a sphere we can get into as long as we have an internet connection, computers, and cameras. It's like, why can't we just do some discussions on our side on this area and start presenting this to people as something that we could do, that secession is actually a viable option? And so we did that starting in 2022. That's when we launched From Steel to Secession AM. We did it as a discussion podcast we would do every so often. We would analyze the events of the day through a secessionist perspective. And then in late 2022, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but let's just say that we kind of stumbled into forming Secession Speakeasy as a podcast where we would discuss actual secession news stories, and not just in America, but across the world. Because we had news coming out of Puerto Rico and Canada and Catalonia and Spain that all merited, discussion on these points. And so that's kind of how it all took off. It was like late 2022, early 2023. And since then, we've grown. We started out as a subscription-based podcast, but we've gradually moved into going more public. And we founded a Substack where we could also start putting out written pieces. I know that actually we're recording this on Friday, June 20th, and one of our pieces just appeared on Lou Rockwell this morning. So, so we've been trying to get this out to basically start people to start thinking of solutions, because everybody likes to complain. And again, I understand the reason why, but at the same time, it's like, it's not enough to merely complain. Do you actually have ideas on how you're going to fix this? How are we going to fix this? And that's kind of what we
by the way, on that. Yeah, congrats on that piece in Rockwell. That was very well written. Very well written.
Thank you.
Very thorough. Yeah, on my end of things, I've been thinking about polarization actually for a long time. As you know, I was in the state legislature for 10 years, and there's a whole backstory about my thought process about polarization. It has to do with some very close friends who are more strongly left-leaning, and just how politics can actually morph a person's perception so badly that it actually acts as a filter even for close friendships. And it's very odd to me. So I've long thought about polarization, and that the cure to it is largely, but not completely, by decentralizing. If we have a government that's closer to us, that responds to us, that has specific needs in mind rather than a one size fits all, then there's much less to complain about. In other words, like I frequently say, North Dakota, Wyoming, and Texas really aren't going to give a crap about the crazy stuff, in their opinion, of what California, New York, and Illinois are doing, and vice versa. And so if what another state doesn't affect us, we don't care. We can roll our eyes and move on. Whereas now, because we are such a nation, and whatever occurs on a national level affects all of us, we are all fighting for control, and we're so impassioned. And then, of course, the process about how we vilify and dehumanize our opponents. But the discussion about, are we headed for a national divorce or a civil war? Should we talk about this? And the need for having more discussion in the public arena occurred to me, or maybe was just underscored for me I'm a fellow for the Club for Growth Foundation. And so whether it's elected officials, or whether it's business people, or whether it's, others, there are people all across the nation that are nicely positioned to make a difference and have a strong concern for the direction of America, and in large part limited government or conservatism or what have you. But we had a discussion talking about how we've gone away from a republic, and how smaller size works better, and the list went on and on and on, A, B, C, D, and it all pointed, if you were thinking with an open mind, it all pointed to like, maybe we would be better off. So after the discussion, question and answer session, and I raised my hand and I asked, now, given all of these things that indicate we would have more freedom if we were to be more of a republic, more of a true federal system, doesn't it warrant an honest, intellectually rigorous discussion about the merits of national divorce? And the audience just audibly groaned at the mere mention of national divorce. And yet after we broke, I had two people come up to me and say, "I'm so glad you asked that question." So what I'm saying, Professor, is that underscored for me the need to have a public discourse about this topic, because people are at least publicly absolutely not wanting to discuss it for fear of being labeled, radical, whatever it might be. But yet in the back of their mind, they're very aware of whether or not there's a need for the interest in discussing it.
I agree with you. Like, I've had similar experiences. I remember when we were first starting, I was trying to get some written pieces out to some people, and I got very similar responses from some platforms that I tried to get published on, to what you experienced in that in that little discussion group. So I hear you, and it's like, and again, I love the way that you talked about how you need to have a rigorous intellectual discussion about these things, because too often in my experience, that it seemed that discussion on the whole issues of secession and national divorce fell into one of two categories. It fell into the category of, it's like, can you believe those traitors and seditionists? That was the one side, and then the other side is like, oh, hunky dory. It's like, it's like, we're gonna go off in the fields of lilies and everything's gonna be just great and all that. It's like, it's not that easy. And my response is, it's not that easy. It's like, you got to think this process through, because there's a process to this, okay? And thankfully, in my own journey here to where we are today, I found that thankfully there are people who are intellectually trying to treat this rigorously as a serious discussion. Like my most recent interview, I had Dr. Matt Huvertrop on, who's an advisor to the Texas Nationalist Movement. He's an academic, very highly respected academic, and he seriously talks about these things, but he gets no publicity because he gets shut out publicly because people don't want to, because what I call the elite classes don't want to have these discussions. Okay, and they try to instill that attitude amongst the populace, just to say, it's like, it's like, you can't discuss those things. It's like those. Hence why in our own discussions we talk about forbidden topics. Like, these are the topics we are forbidden to discuss. It's all right.
But yes, yeah, it's interesting. Like you mentioned, the forbidden topics and all. And really, if we're being adults, there should be no topic that's forbidden. We should be able to discuss any of these things. And if you can read the handwriting on the wall, we need to have this discussion. So the premise of, from my angle, my podcast is that we absolutely must decentralize, or we need to prepare for a national divorce. Now, I personally think the best option would be true decentralization, a true federal system, and avoid the need for a national divorce. However, the likelihood of that, I think that everything points to it being extremely unlikely given history. And therefore, in that regard, then if that's the case, we strongly need to look at national divorce so that we don't end up in a civil war. Are your publications different in the sense of, are you overtly advocating for national divorce or secession?
Well, let's put it this way. I am not opposed, and I think I can speak on behalf of some of my co-hosts here, that if there were a way to radically decentralize without breaking everything up, I would say, yeah, by all means, let's try that route. But my experience has taught me that basically it's like, you're not, even if you want to get to that point, you're not going to get to that point unless you advocate the most radical approach possible in this context. Okay? I remember years ago, a mentor I had when I was a kid, a religious individual, he told me, he said, you always shoot real high because you're going to end up going just below that. Okay? That's kind of been my attitude ever since, is that it's like, look, it's like, if the best we get is radical decentralization, so be it. So be it. Okay? I can live with that. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge the fact, as you said, the odds don't look very high, okay? Because this is something that I've come to a conclusion with through my studies. In fact, I don't think I have the books handy here, but two books that kind of radically changed my thinking on this process and made me realize that you had to advocate for secession, national divorce, just up front, all the way, was reading Dr. Philip Zimbardo's book, The Lucifer Effect, which explores how good people turn evil. Okay, he fascinated by that concept, and people may not know his name very well, but they may know the experiment that he ran, which was the Stanford prison experiment back in the 1970s. He was the man who ran that experiment. All right, and what he found was that it was the structures themselves, the situations themselves, that corrupted good people. That's what he discovered. I mean, if I might use a Christian term here, it's what in Christianity is often called near occasions of sin. All right, where you're put into a position where basically you are more likely to engage in evil actions. The situation around you inclines you towards that. All right, and to me, I see the political structures as providing that incentive, because Zimbardo doesn't explicitly say that, but if you read it all throughout his book, the situations he keeps coming up with are people in authority positions being tempted to do these things. All right? And then the second book, and this man built off Zimbardo's research and applied it to the political sphere, and I was actually made aware of this book thanks to Tom Woods, who had the author of this book on his podcast some years ago. Professor Michael Huemer's book, The Problem of Political Authority, where he went through and he dissected. He's like, what gives political figures authority? He's like, do they have the right to do certain things if regular individuals can't do these things? And what's the justification for it? Okay? And he laid out that there were a lot of fallacies involved, a lot of logical fallacies involved with this. And then he applied that to what Zimbardo had already discovered and said, we've got a problem here where the very structures encourage the tyranny, the suffering, everything that unfolds. And so the only way that you're going to really stop this is the structures themselves have to come down. They have to be disassembled and decentralized as much as you can. And sometimes, again, I'm speaking here from my own logical procession here, because Zimbardo and Huemer didn't say this, but this is what I discerned after reading their works, is that the only way you do that is the people have to have a tool in their toolbox to make it happen, and that's secession. It has to be a serious tool of use. Okay? And to me right now, I don't need to tell the audience this. I think everybody can see that governments all over the world are out of control right now. All right, they're completely out of control. All right, so how do you fight back against that? In such a way that's not going to promote, like as you say with your podcast, it's not going to promote war, or at least it's going to, make it worse through the war prospect. And I'm like, pulling away, separating. That's what secession is. Basically, when you boil down, the definition of secession means separation. Okay, you need to separate yourself from the structure so that the structure then comes apart. We saw this in 1989 through 1991 with the Soviet Union. They just pulled away. They pulled away, and the structure came down. Okay, so that's kind of my approach to it. So I guess kind of a long description to your question of, yes, I do advocate national divorce all the way, because I see this as a key part of taking the structures of tyranny apart. That's what I see, right? That's how I see this coming about. So, but I also understand that you kind of have a different approach to that. So I'd be interested to hear your response to that, and what your thinking process is on this.
Yeah, I mean it's very similar in concept. The what you derive from those books and some of the quotes falls in line with some of the other things we've heard about, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Jefferson with the the government closest to you is the best government, paraphrase, and so forth. So these are things that we have known for hundreds of years, but we need to keep reminding, because we're always being pushed back against the machine, if you will. And that machine is an ever coalescing power, and the human nature to try and derive more power. And that's done by centralizing more. So the way I view it is, if we were to embark somehow successfully on decentralizing on a true federal system, it really is not all that much different from how things would look with a national divorce, sort of. So hear me out. In a true federal system, the way it was originally envisioned when we went from the Articles of Confederation, and it was a confederation moving to a federation, if you will, or a federal system, it simply meant that there was a little bit of more cohesiveness, right? You could coin money, you could come together and provide for a national defense. There are just a few things that the national government was supposed to be allowed. And other than that, you really had 50 separate and sovereign states. So it's almost like if we were to have a national divorce, and instead of having, say, Pacifica and what I call Yankeedom up in the Northeast, and if you had the Southeast, and if you had the Heartland, instead of breaking up into sub-countries, if each state broke away and formed its own country in this massive radical secession type of movement, and then said, you know what, we should all band together to only coin money and provide for national defense, there you have effectively the same end result from two different paths. One is decentralizing with the federal government. The other is complete secession, and then realizing that it is in the mutual benefit of the sovereign nations in this regard, or states, to sort of work together on a couple of very limited, very specific things. So the end goal is really the same. Now, I think that the idea of national divorce is intriguing and it's exciting. I think that many of our founding fathers would probably also be intrigued with the idea, given how far and how tyrannical our central government has become, how pervasive it is in our daily lives. They would absolutely, I think, be remorseful that they didn't listen more closely to the Anti-Federalists. And they would say, holy crap, especially Jefferson, right? Holy crap, we need a do-over. And I think that it would be great, because they never in a million years would have envisioned a nation of wherever we are now, 380 million people or what have you, across the entire continent, being governed out of the District of Columbia.
Yeah, I can see that, and there are people. I will say that there are people I've networked in secession circles who are pushing what you're talking about. Basically, it's like, let's secede and form new confederations. And my attitude's always been, okay, it's like I'm not opposed to that idea at all. Okay, it's like I could definitely see that happening. It's like, and there's even talk now that I'm sure you've probably heard that secession talk is exploding in some of the Canadian provinces like Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Quebec. And there's even been talk there, I understand, between different circles about possible new confederation, also including some of those provinces if they successfully split in the not too distant future. And like I said, I'm okay with that. But then my what I would tell those people also is, like, if you're going to do that, you have to put very clear, very distinct boundaries beyond which whatever central authority you have cannot cross. Cannot cross. There cannot be ambiguities involved, because in my mind, one of the weaknesses in the 1787 Constitution that the founders formed was that there were a couple of phrases thrown in there, and I know the Anti-Federalists threw a fit over some of them, very ambiguous as to what they meant by that. Okay, not to mention, as I forget who said this quote. I know Edward Snowden, I think it was either Edward Snowden or Julian Assange referenced it recently, that they said parchment barriers don't stop a tyrant's quest for power. Okay, I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what they said. And they were quoting somebody earlier in American history who said that. I don't remember who off the top of my head, but so it's like, and so in my mind there too, that's why I'm also thinking it's like in these new confederations, there have to be tools given to the people to check the power. And that's why I'm like, if you were going to have a confederation, you can't have just an assumed right of secession, which is what the 1787 Constitution had, thanks to Virginia, New York, and Rhode Island all putting in their acceptance documents that we reserve this right. No, you have to put it, the compact, constitution, treaty, whatever it is that forms this confederation, that each member has the right to separate if they deem it necessary to preserve their freedoms or whatever. Okay, it's like, so you have to include that as well. So again, I mean, that's kind of my thought process there on that point, where I'm just like, okay, it's like we could reconfigure into something, but there would have to be, I think, and actually I'd like your opinion on this. I think even if you were to go that confederation route, you're still going to need the process of secession to bring it about, because, and I think this is a key point, the states each have to assert their own sovereignty again. Because under the current Constitution, what my regular co-host, Mr. Green, likes to call the Victor's Constitution, that we got in the aftermath of the 1860s, and we got a new rendition of it in the 1960s. Under that Victor's Constitution, that Victor's interpretation of the Constitution, the states are not sovereign. Well, in order for this confederation to work, the states have to reassert that sovereignty. And even if we get new states, because like I cover a lot of the state splitting movements, like Illinois, the movement to split that state in two. There's a movement now in Missouri to split that state in two. Greater Idaho, and so on. It's like those sections also have to assert their sovereignty. It's like and say, hey, we do things our own. And I think that's the only way that you could bring about what you're talking about, which is basically a vast reassertion of federalism. Was like, well, we're still going to have secession be part of that process because sovereignty has to be reasserted. But I'd like your opinion on that and what you think about that.
Yeah, so I think the question maybe worded differently would be: is it possible to assert state sovereignty without secession? And that's a great question. I mean, we'd have to go back and say, okay, here is the on its face meaning of the words in the Constitution, because that's the original intent, as well as textualism. And how would that be done? Right? It wouldn't be an executive order is not going to make a difference. A resolution by Congress isn't going to make a difference. I don't know. The Supreme Court would have to walk back how it's expanded the General Welfare Clause, the 14th Amendment, so on and so forth. It would be extraordinarily hard. Now, it may be without secession, perhaps one way of circumventing this whole issue would be an Article 5 convention, where you go through and say, okay, we're going to rewrite these various amendments, remove some amendments, hopefully, and perhaps add other amendments that clarify and very, very clearly state what this individual state sovereignty is all about. What do you think about an Article 5? Would that be a solution?
The barrier that I see with Article 5 is first, I don't think you can get enough states to sign on to it. I don't think you can hit the 3/4. Okay, because there's enough states. The only way you could potentially reach that 3/4, and this would involve a far longer process, in my opinion, is that you'd have to have some of those state splitting movements I talked about. Some of those would have to succeed. Like, it's like, in order to get like an Illinois type state on board, well, you have to have downstate Illinois be its own state and then add to their number and stuff like that. Okay, I so I don't so that's one barrier that I see. I don't see a path to reach the 3/4 clause, that would trigger that. Okay, I don't see
Right.
enough states signing on. So that would be my first. That would be the first barrier that I see. The other one that I see, and this is rooted just in my understanding of power. We've seen that the federal government in Washington D.C. disregards the Constitution, basically whenever they feel like it. Okay, they don't care. The people who hold the real strings of power don't give a whit about it. All right, they like using it when it's a good public relations stunt. All right, we're seeing that right now with what's going on in California. All right, okay, it's like, and I'm not saying that they don't have. I'm not saying that the people in California who are objecting to some of Trump's moves don't have good arguments, but I'm like, where was that argument when Biden was doing stuff like that? Okay, where was that?
Yeah.
All right.
Right.
So anyway,
Yep.
So my point being that I see that even if you were to trigger an Article 5 convention, that DC would not let it happen. They would take steps to shut it down. They would find ways to. They would either sue them and take them to the Supreme Court and have the Supreme Court shut it down and say, it's like under this interpretation, this thing follows, and so therefore you can't hold it. And so I see that they would. I mean, we've already seen this in Europe with the way they're canceling elections. There's no way. I can't see DC not doing that if they perceive an Article 5 convention as being a serious threat to their power. Okay,
Yeah.
so that would be that. Those are so again. I'm not opposed to the concept. I mean, I was big on the Article 5 idea a couple of years ago until I ran some of the numbers and started seeing, some of the practicalities, and I was like, I don't see a path forward for this to be accomplished without a huge legal fight that could turn real nasty. That could even turn violent at some point. We've already seen what they did with January 6th. Okay? Who's to say that even if they held the Article 5 convention without DC's approval, that then they would then, do a January 6th times 10 there, and then throw all these people in jail and so on. So again, I'll just say this: I'm very cynical when it comes to exercise of power. So I tend to think along those lines there.
So summarized, I think we're probably in the same spot, except I'm still going through the exercise of wanting to discuss how we could decentralize and whether we can decentralize and whether that's preferable. But summarized, I would say, to get to a true federal system with the system we currently have, we would have to have numerous judicial Supreme Court rulings. We would have to have laws passed that clarify exactly what each of these sort of steps, again, to walk everything back. We would need to close numerous agencies. We would have to convert Social Security, Medicare, and so forth to being a state-run option. So many things would have to come in place that we'd have to ask ourselves, what are the odds of that? Well, slim to none. Or option B, we would need a convention of states to take place, not only to take place, but that they would endeavor to do each of the things, because it's not just a term limits and it's not just a balanced budget. There would need to be numerous things done within Article 5. What are the odds that not only in Article 5 would happen, but that they would accomplish all of the things necessary to provide a true federal system as originally envisioned by the founding fathers? Slim to none. And so then we have where you're the realist, probably, and a secession or national divorce is in the making.
I think you could say that. I know some people have called me an optimist when it comes to the whole secession angle, and I always tell people it's like my optimism is tempered with realism, because it does no good to put up false hopes, in my opinion. Is like, and again, I want to just state here, it's a lot of the things that you're talking about there. Again, those were conversations I was having with other people and with myself like 8 years ago. Okay, I was kind of saying that you might be where I was 8 years ago, where you're realizing, a lot of things are becoming clear, and you're just like, well, it's like now, and you're experimenting, saying it's like, okay, could we do this? Could we do that? Could we do this? Could we do that? It's like, and I always tell people, it's like, look, it's like everybody has to come to this conclusion at their own pace, their own time, and realize what the reality is. And and I know that I've had my mind changed on some things. It's like, and I've told people before, it's like, look, it's like if I'm shown that my approach is wrong in a convincing way through logic and fact, it's like I will change my viewpoint and say, okay, these are now the views that I hold. And I know in my own case here, with where I am today, with advocating national divorce and secession, this is where my logic and the facts on the ground have led me at this time, where I'm just like, okay, it's like we're not going to get any substantial change for a lot of the reasons that you just listed. With basically, it's like okay, it's like well, they're not going to do this, they're not going to do that. It's like, I mean, as you were talking there about all the things that needed to get rescinded and all that, it's like I think we just had somebody try to do that in Elon Musk, and look where that got him.
Right. So, yeah. Very true. Very true. So where do you see us in 10 years? Are we, where do you see us? Are we in a civil war? Have we gone through a civil war? Are we broken up into several smaller nations? Or are we continuing to just plod along as is, polarized as ever, and going further into debt?
Well, I'm going to defer to someone that I respect very much. He's been incredibly accurate on projecting trends and so on. And I first heard of him through Lou Rockwell. Lou Rockwell has published his stuff in the past. Martin Armstrong, the forecaster. Martin Armstrong is very good at identifying trends thanks to his computer system called Socrates. And Socrates, he says, is projecting that not only America, but much of the world politically is in a process now of beginning to break up. And that come 2032, America, Canada, Europe, he's even starting to, Africa, the signs are all over the place. Asia as well, there's signs starting to show up there. Reality is the only two places I don't see it in the world right now, or I should probably add three. The only three places I really don't see it are Russia, Hungary, and Iceland. Those are the only places I don't really see some kind of serious separatism talk going on in the world. Getting to your point there, what I see, Armstrong's saying by 2032, this is going to be in full swing. And where I see us in 5 years is I think the breakup will happen. Kind of a sobering perspective here, but I don't think that violence is unavoidable. I think there will be cases of violent conflict in some areas, sadly. All right? Because the reality is, and this is another conclusion I've come through a lot of my reading and studies. Power is an addiction. Once you hold it, if you don't control it, if you don't control your exercise of it, you can really go off the deep end, especially as you gravitate more to yourself. All right? We're already seeing this in the EU with their canceling elections, on their say-so, and throwing people in jail on their say-so. Okay, we saw this in the Biden administration. I'm even seeing signs of this from Trump, sadly. All right? The power's gone to his head. It's an addiction. He likes exercising it. Okay? And so for that reason, there are going to be efforts in some areas, I believe, where separation is going to be met with efforts to try and bring them back under control using violence of some kind. All right? So sadly, I think we are going to see some of it. My hope is that we can contain it as much as possible, and that there will only be some areas where it happens. Okay? I think Europe, unfortunately, is going to have a lot of violence. America, I think we can have a chance to control it. In some areas. Sadly, I think there'll be areas of California where there might be violence, Illinois as well, maybe parts of New England. Okay, it's like, New York. Okay, again, I don't say this with any pleasure. I don't like that idea, but at the same time, that's what reality tells me, is that as the people who hold power start to lose their power, they're going to panic, and they're going to do something to try and stop it. But in terms of where we are, go ahead.
Let me ask you just a bit more on that. So where you see that there's, to a limited degree at least, violence that's unavoidable, The violence is between whom? Citizens of one state or region versus another, National Guard units of individual states, the federal military. Where are you seeing this clashes?
Well, I think it will be. Well, I think within states themselves, you're going to see, like, you might see National Guard. Like, for instance, if downstate Illinois pulls out, or the greater Idaho counties in Oregon and so on, if they pull out unilaterally, as things really start to get bad, I think that you'll see maybe National Guard coming at that. I don't think you're going to see very much of citizen versus citizen because, and I've talked with a couple left wing secession movements, like the ones in California, and they are just live and let live. Let us do our thing. It's like, we don't care what Texas does. Let them do their thing. Okay, so the citizens, I don't think you're going to see so much violence between citizens. Okay, I think that's a facade that the elites throw out there. Okay, what I think you're more going to see is that it's going to be people who hold authority, who have control over whether it's National Guard or troops or whatnot, so on. That's where you're going to see the violence. It's going to be like, if I might make this parallel, it's not going to be too dissimilar to what we saw in April 1775 in Massachusetts, all right, where the British troops came in and they're invading these rural towns around, and they're getting pushback. Okay, it's not. I think that's what it's going to look like. Okay, is that there's going to be because the violence is going to come about through people trying to hang on to their power. It'll be the people who hold the power who will instigate the violence. All right? I think that that's where we'll see it. Now, that doesn't mean that we may not have violence in terms of riots if there's, like, no food or something like that. I know Martin Armstrong's warning about that. We may have some of that for sure. But I think the main violence we're going to see is going to be government leaders, whether state or federal, using troops trying to reassert their power when they see their power slipping away, when this group or that group pulls away and says, we're done. We're not listening to you anymore. Okay? So
I can see that for instance, the riots that took place in Los Angeles recently based on immigration and so forth. But if we were to take this scenario but apply something that has a greater buy-in from the population at large, because I think that there's a tiny minority that wants to see illegal immigration unrestrained. And so you've got these more fringe people and they're rioting. Well, the populace is not really joining in.
right.
But if you had a grievance that the majority of people bought into and some were resisting, and then the feds came in to try and quell that resistance, then you would see a surgence of many more citizens coming to the aid. And there I can see could result in violence because you've got the whether it's the National Guard and or military told they've got this job to do. It's their duty. They're trying to enforce federal law, but you've got a true citizenry that's resisting. How is it going to end except in violence?
Yeah, no, that's kind of the same idea that I have. It's like, because I mean, it's you're right. I think you're right on that. And it's like, and again, like I said, I don't say that with any pleasure. Okay, I don't like that idea, but again, we have to keep in mind, how do people who hold power think? All right, to them, power is all about, it's like power in their ego. That's a dangerous Molotov cocktail that you're dealing with there in the political realm. But you asked me about, it's like, where do I see America in 10 years? And I'm going to say that this is kind of where I see things going right now. You mentioned Jefferson earlier in the conversation, and Jefferson, when the Louisiana Purchase took place, he said that he believed that, America would stretch, encompass the continent, stretch from sea to sea. But he also said that he didn't think that it would be possible for that whole stretch to be ruled just from Washington. He felt that we were going to have a few different confederations that would come out of, and they would probably unite for things like military and trade. But outside of that, it would largely be, hey, they govern each other, they govern themselves, as, brethren, just work, living in this approximately the same location. So, and as of right now, just, because I like looking at these things from a more of a balanced perspective, there are sections of the country that are not going to be able to unite with others. It's because the cultures are just so different. And so I think that I think we're going to have multiple confederations. Some people that I've listened to have proposed that there should be this confederation that stretches from Key West, Florida, all the way up through the center of the United States, cutting off the coasts for the most part, and stretching into Canada, taking in Alberta, Saskatchewan, parts of British Columbia, Yukon, and Northwest Territories to connect, so that basically you could drive from Point Barrow, Alaska, all the way to Key West, Florida, without ever leaving, America, the new United States, as they would call it.
Mm-hmm.
That is a possibility. I think it less likely, just because even amongst areas that vote the same way nationally, like they all vote Republican, there's still a ton of differences. Okay, I have a hard time seeing the southeastern United States basically, even though they vote the same, basically getting, being able to do a solid confederation with the Great Plains states. Okay, because the cultures are just so different. And having lived in both at times during my life, I know the differences. There's enough differences there that I think that you wouldn't be able to do one confederation with all of them. I think you would have two different confederations, again, with that alliance of for military and trade purposes. There are some states that are going to go it alone no matter what. The Texas nationalists have made it very clear we're not doing any confederation. We're on our own. He's like, God bless Texas, So that's their attitude. And I can kind of see that. I think Texas will probably be largely on its own, but they may do alliances. They may do trade agreements and all that. I don't think they're going to be a hostile neighbor. Believe it or not, I have a hard time seeing New Hampshire being a part of a confederation unless it's a part of a confederation that they're at the center of. Like, I know, talking with some of the New Hampshire activists, they're talking about, if they have a confederation, they're talking about, like, well, we'll take that little northeastern part of Vermont that doesn't get along with the rest of Vermont. We'll take northern Maine, and we'll take the rural section of New Brunswick, which thinks a lot of the same way we do, and we'll do a confederation that way. But we're not going to have anything to do with the coast of Maine or Massachusetts or anything like that. So again, they all have their own ideas. What turns out practically is anybody's guess, but I think we're going to have at least a couple different confederations that are going to come out of this. I think that's what America is going to look like. I think the coasts are going to be largely confederations. Although I think also some states are going to disappear. They're going to break up and become different things. Like Oregon, I don't think will stay together. Neither will California. Illinois, while it won't stay together. Parts of Missouri are going to break off. I think New York State will break into a couple different. New Jersey is probably going to split. Maryland as well. Virginia, I think, is going to have some splitting going on. Washington State is definitely going to split. There's a lot of talk going on there right now. And so there's going to be a lot of splits. I mean, America is going to look very different. Okay, I think that's the only thing I can say with certainty. Within 10 years, America's political boundaries are going to look very, very different by the end of it. And I'll leave you with this, just an indication of where thoughts are going and where you might see splits. If you see conversations going on about splitting, chances are that split's going to happen. Okay, because they wouldn't be talking about it openly if the situation were not untenable as it currently stands. And I think that's the number one thing that's been driving this whole national divorce phenomenon, is that the common people, their situation, it's untenable. They can't make things go. It's becoming more untenable. And as I stated earlier, I said I feared we were still going to have some riots. Well, and the reason I fear that is because, when the economic collapse comes, where are you going to get your food? There are going to be areas that are going to be desperate for stuff like that. People are going to get desperate. The situation will become so untenable, they'll have no other place to go. They'll have nothing else to do. And again, like I said, I don't say that with any relish. I fear that. I don't fear it, but I'm really saddened to think that will happen. But I think that that's a real possibility going forward. So, but as the untenability grows, America, the splits will happen. And eventually, when people have nothing to lose, that's when you'll really start seeing the splits. Like, will really become very, very evident to everybody, is when everybody will say, I have nothing to lose at this point. Is like, so let's just do it. Okay? And that's when it's going to happen. So I could throw that question back to you, though, based on your experience. You've seen some things that I haven't. So, I could throw that same question back to you, where you see things in 10 years with America.
Yeah. Well, So I think I'll give you a two-part answer. So I have a history of thinking something's going to happen and it never happens. For instance, I've been expecting huge inflation for the last 10 years and it hasn't happened, or at least it hasn't been overt, which is an entirely separate discussion. But I have been thinking that something is going to be happening soon. I'm tempering that now because I was seeing when Biden was in office, a lot of the right, there was so much talk about national divorce, secession, and so forth. And as soon as Trump was elected, a lot of that chatter on the right sort of decreased, but the chatter on the left increased. And so I'm getting a sense it's sort of this pendulum swing. There's these little fires, but before they become uncontrollable blazes, the pendulum swings, and then there's a different blaze. And so it makes me think like, okay, this is just another one of those things where it seems like something should happen, but it's not going to happen. However, I think that there will likely be an inciting event or circumstance that is beyond the normal to and fro politically. And when we're looking at, especially a couple of things out there, when you're looking at the possibility of a CBDC, central bank digital currency, which completely changes the relationship between government and the individual, completely puts freedom at risk and just gets rid of freedom as we know it. You have that as a looming situation. You have AI and the states wanting to be able to have some say in it, and the US government saying, hey, we want a moratorium on the states having any control over AI. That is changing and evolving so quickly, we can't even anticipate what that might look like. And then you've got all this crazy, things like COVID, these black swan events that may happen. And what we learned from COVID was it doesn't take much before society starts to break down and supply chains break down. And we are then looking out not for a whole nation, but we're looking out for our town and then perhaps our state. So my thought is that if not for an inciting circumstance or event, this might just be back to and fro. But I think things are changing in the world so much, especially with AI, that there will be an inciting event and the US will break apart because we are different people within the United States. We have some commonality, there's no doubt, but we have different cultures. We're different people. We think differently, as evidenced by the red states and blue states during COVID. So I do think that there will be a national divorce. I don't think there will be a civil war when we think about there being two sides to a civil war. I can't imagine that the federal government, they may put down something, but if it flares up, I don't foresee that we have troops, which young men and women who are tamping down their fellow citizens. I just don't see that happening. So I don't see a civil war in the normal circumstance. I agree with you that when there is something like this, and we've seen it in the past, not just during the Civil War, of course, but with other situations that have been very, very intense, there has been some violence. I'm sure we're going to see some of that, but no civil war. So 10 years, short answer, 10 years from now, yes, I don't think that the United States will be as we see it right now.
Okay, no, that and that's valid, and I hear your talk about the pendulum thing. I get that argument a lot. Although I'll just throw this in here just real quick as just something to think about, going forward, both for you and the audience, is that you talked about something that will ignite, something that that the ignition that just stops the pendulum swinging, and now we got a new situation is necessitated. Some people that I've talked to, the one in particular is Colonel Karen Kwiatkowski, who's she ran for Congress as a Ron Paul Republican years ago, and she thinks it's gonna. She says all the signs are there. She's like, America's going the same route as the Soviet Union, and why did the Soviet Union finally unwind? Because economically it could no longer keep going. That was like the trigger event that finally brought all the other things into play, and then it all just came apart. And she's saying it's going to be the same thing. I know she and Judge Andrew Napolitano have talked about it publicly, and Judge Napolitano agrees with her on that he thinks that that's what's going to cause the split, because he believes national divorce is coming as well. So, I mean, again, I think that's the most likely thing. I mean, obviously we don't know if the future is a very unpredictable beast, but I would say this too, in that we know that the path is unsustainable. And I love pulling on this quote from Charles Dickens in his most famous work, A Christmas Carol, where he says, men's courses foreshadow certain ends unless those ends be departed from. And the course of the people leading the United States right now, their course they've set is directing America's Titanic towards the iceberg, if we've not already hit it. All right. I don't know if we've hit it or not. I think COVID may have been that iceberg. I don't know. Okay. But right now, I see no attempt to change the course of America's Titanic. We're headed for that iceberg. Okay. Unless somebody gets in and changes things. I thought Trump and Musk might. I wasn't sold on it entirely because I knew how power corrupts, but I was willing to give him a chance. But we saw how that's turned out. It's like, Musk hasn't gotten anything of substance through, sadly. Okay, so, and I'm like, well, it's like, unless that course changes, he's like, I don't see how, this is where it says that we're going to head. Rome and the Soviet Union and Great Britain all went this route, and this is what happened.
Absolutely. I've got, before we finish up here, if you're willing, I usually do rapid fire.
Go ahead.
Some simple questions, short, fast. Okay, got them right here. The first state or city most likely to secede from the Union?
Texas, no question, okay. Texas.
Which is a greater threat to our liberty, a central bank digital currency or our debt?
CBDC, easily, because that controls the people. All the debt does is when the debt collapses, the people will the people will just say, okay, it's like we're going to do our own thing now.
Okay. Article 5 convention, we've kind of covered that, but in general, do you think that is a net positive or a net negative?
I think it's a net positive in that it gets people talking. And I'm glad of that, but I just don't see any way for it to practically come about.
Okay. Which of our founding fathers would back national divorce today?
Jefferson, I think definitely. I think John Adams, I think, would definitely be on board with it too. John Adams was the one calling for national divorce from Great Britain before everybody else was in the American War for Independence. So I think Jefferson and Adams would. There are a couple others out there too, but those two are the ones that come to mind immediately.
Yeah, and of course you have the Anti-Federalists that would all probably jump on board.
Yes.
They pay admission to get on board that train.
Oh yes, yes indeed.
Which agency would you defund first? The FBI, the IRS, or Department of Education?
I can't choose all at once. I think I would do the IRS. Because if you got rid of the IRS, if the people had financial freedom, they could push back more effectively.
Okay. And then one book that every secessionist must read.
Oh boy, only one book. Okay. I'm
happy to hear more, but
okay, I'll begin with this one. I think this one answers all the questions right off the bat here. Just pull it up here. Ryan McMakin, Breaking Away: The Case for Secession, Radical Decentralization, and Smaller Polities. That's the number one that I think everybody should read, because McMakin meticulously lays out how it would happen, why it should happen, and why it's effective.
Good.
Right.
Well, that's all I've got for you for rapid fire.
Okay. You mind if I just plug a couple more resources quick for people who are interested in learning more?
Please do. Yeah. No.
Okay.
You're.
All right. So obviously here, I'm gonna share the two books I mentioned earlier in the show here real quick. Dr. Philip Zimbardo's The Lucifer Effect, if you're interested in knowing more about how power corrupts. Again, this is not explicitly a secessionist book, but if you want to know how power works, Zimbardo is very meticulous in his descriptions. Some of the descriptions are not very pleasant to read. I will warn you about that. But he's very effective, and again, it's like, especially if you hail from more of a Christian perspective, you're going to find a lot of things that are very similar to what is taught about temptation and sin in there. Then, obviously, this book here, Michael Huemer, The Problem of Political Authority. He builds on Zimbardo's work, and he does a very good job deconstructing basically where the state should have authority and where it shouldn't. I don't agree with all of his arguments, but he raises really good questions about where the boundaries for the state, for government, should be. He raises incredibly important, very good questions. All right, so I would definitely recommend that one as well. This one here, this is one of three, along with McMakin's book, that I recommend to people. F.H. Buckley, American Secession. This came out, I think it came out shortly before COVID, and I think he was the one who started popularizing, along with Tom Woods, this concept of national divorce. And Buckley's one of those people, at least in the book. I don't know where he stands currently. I'm actually trying to get another interview with him because I've talked with him once before. I'd be interested to see where his thought process is now. But at the time that he wrote this book, he was, he put out all these arguments in favor of secession, but he said, I'm more of a He said, think federalism, radical federalism, what he called home rule, would be more in line with what should happen. So again, it was one of those books that was like, he makes a lot of good arguments, and he also points out the benefits of federalism. And my argument for people who read it is like, look, it's like, even if you have to go all the way with secession and all that, it's like, he brings up good points on where checks should be laid as to, in future governing structures. See, just got 3 more here real quick. This one was from early 2000s. Rethinking the American Union for the 21st Century. This is a collection of essays edited by Donald Livingston. And something that jumps out at me here is that the essays in this book, they really they go at secession from a number of different angles. One particularly powerful essay in there deals with the legal aspects of it, which I was like, that was fascinating. I was like, because he talks about secession in regards to contractual law, and he compared the two, and I was like, that was a fascinating look, at how you could apply the two and how they work together. This one here, this book is rather new, but I had the honor of editing this book, or helping edit this book, and it has a very powerful punch in its arguments. National Divorce, A Plan for Peace by Jason Fry. Again, it's written for the everyday person, so because some of these other ones are academically oriented, so it may be a little tough to parse through them for some people, but
now Fry is Texas, right?
Yes, he is. Yes, Fry is from Texas. Yeah. I interviewed him when the book came out. So, but yeah, he has a very, very sound, very, very basic argument. And then lastly, I just interviewed this individual, Dr. Matt Kuvertrop's book, I Want to Break Free, A Practical Guide to Making a New Country. And I think Kuvertrop has been looking over secession and independence movements in most of the world for a lot of his life. And I think he raises some really good insights from his experience as to things to watch for, things to plan for, and just things you need to keep in mind as you go about doing this. And then lastly, this book's not published yet, but I am writing a book of my own on secession, which is coming at justifying secession from the philosophical and natural law perspective, showing that there is a right to secession in both philosophy and natural law. And that book, I'm currently doing research and writing parts of it. If you folks want to know where a lot of my ideas about power came from, that's because I'm writing the chapter on power right now. So it's kind of at the forefront of my mind. So
yeah,
but that book,
that's fantastic. Good for you. So when do you expect that to come out?
I can't say for sure. I'm hoping it's going to come out next year, but I can't make guarantees because one of the things with this book is, especially here, because as I'm sure you know, a lot of people like manipulating language. I have to make sure my terms are defined. I have to cross all my T's and dot all my I's, because otherwise this could get torn apart. So I have to. So I'm hoping next year, but no guarantees. So, but that's the plan as of right now. So, and then I guess I'll just throw it back to you if you have any other resources of your own to share before we wrap up here.
Well, yeah, I just encourage viewers to go out and do the research. Buckley's book and McMackin's book, both are, I think, sort of, you're starting good foundation. I'm reading a book right now called, Leviathan, State and Leviathan, something like that. Very good. Mm-hmm. There's a book behind me. It's a very easy, light reading, Crossroads for Liberty. And in there, for instance, I learned about a really unique approach to trying to decentralize, where the way George Mason originally envisioned Article 5 is different than how it ended up. And if we had a constitutional amendment that would convert Article 5 to George Mason's original version, that would help a lot. So very interesting things. And then, of course, you've got, all the just good basic research, which is all at our fingertips right now. For instance, last week, I just read the opinion of Texas v. White, which is supposedly why they say that secession is unconstitutional. Well, when you read the opinion, it's bogus. It's a Supreme Court decision that was obviously made. It was made 4 years after the Civil War. It was made not on the merits of the case, but on what the majority of the Supreme Court felt they had to do. The dissenting opinion is sort of just very. So what I'm saying to people is, look, when you hear things, for instance, that secession is unconstitutional, look it up. And there's so much out there. I'm glad you're writing a book. I think the more, and your approach, by the way, is something that really needs to be looked at in depth, because of course we have a voluntary compact, and if you can't leave, then you're a slave.
Right.
But I'm gonna, yeah. So yeah, that's what I've got. Is there's so much out there. I barely hit the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, well, if you want a good discussion on all the fallacies with Texas v. White, you got to talk to Daniel Miller, the leader of the Texas Nationalist Movement. He'll give you a whole seminar on all the things wrong with that. So, because when I had him on, he tore it apart. So it was so fun to listen to. So, but yeah, no, and
Yep.
I just want to end by saying, it's like, I am so glad that you have launched this podcast and that you're having these discussions, because these are the discussions we need to have right now. Okay, I mentioned this at the beginning of the show. It's like, I don't want to downplay the importance of bringing the malfeasance of the elite classes to our attention. That's important. But too often, I think we focus on, and I think too many podcasters focus on complaining about these things rather than saying, how do we fix this? Okay, how do we stop it? How do we fix it? How do we make sure that this doesn't happen? But again, it's like, how do we go about, bringing back to where we're supposed to be? It's like, it doesn't seem like there's enough of that kind of conversation going on. And that's one of the prime reasons we started this podcast in the first place, was we wanted to say, here's a solution. Let's discuss it and see if it's possible. Okay, it's like, and I'm glad that and from what I can tell from our conversation here, you've got the same attitude, and I'm very glad about that. That it's like, we got to talk about, what are we going to do? Okay, it's like, it's one thing to know about the malfeasance; it's quite another to say, okay, now how do we fix it? Okay, and
True.
And I'm at the point now where I'm just like, I don't know how effective voting is, especially in the wake of 2020. I'm sure everybody knows what I mean there. Okay, so I'm just like, well, it's like, we got to come up with more options than just that. We got to come up with more approaches than just that, than just casting a ballot every 1 to 2 years.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yep. Agreed. Well, Professor, this was fun. I'm glad that we were able to kind of double team with our podcasts. Yeah. And for your viewers, again, this is new. You're Professor, you're episode number 5, but people can find us on the various socials and YouTube and Spotify and all that under WDF.show or WDF_show, any of those types of things. And where can we find you?
Okay, well, the main website you can go to that links to all of our stuff is keepgovlocal.com. That's KEEPGOVLOCAL.com. All right. Everything's linked to on that homepage. The podcasts are all linked to. The Substack, our State of Division, is linked to there as well as our locals page, which is our subscription site. We do, if you guys want to support our efforts, Substack and locals, we are able to receive payments through them. So, and we would appreciate it, because I'm sure everybody's aware the economy's not in good shape right now, so it's a struggle to keep this going sometimes. But again, I mean, like, I wouldn't trade this for anything in the world, because I feel like we're making a difference. So, but keepgovlocal.com is the place where you're going to go. Although, a heads up, if you try finding us on YouTube or places like that, we're not there, because we launched in the middle of COVID, so everybody was censor happy. We went with Rumble, Odyssey, and BitChute. That's where a lot of our public stuff is on there, and on our Substack. So if you want to find our stuff, that's the main places where you need to go right now, is to check those video sites. And again, those are all linked on keepgovlocal.com.
Well, yeah, it was fun. We should do this again maybe some months down the road and see where we're at.
Yeah, well, I definitely want to have you on for some of our tavern roundtables we've got coming up. So let's have a good discussion with a couple of different folks here, and just go around. It's like, well, where are we at, in the world, and what are we going to do about it? So,
yeah,
but yeah,
I like that idea.
Yeah. So no, we'll definitely be in touch, and folks, we have just a bit. We have linked on the Substack page, and we're going to link to it on the main Keep Gov local page as well. We're going to link to Dr. Becker's Substack. It's already linked. There's a link to Dr. Becker's podcast on our Substack page under fellow podcasts. So if you need to go find him, I would recommend going there. They'll take you directly to his YouTube page. And as I said, we'll be putting a page up on the KeepGov local site as well here within the next couple of days, that you guys can go and check him out and follow him. And folks, if you like what we do here, you need to support Dr. Becker, because guess what? We need more people having these conversations. My team and I can't do this alone, and Dr. Becker's got a wealth of knowledge and is doing the American people a great service by talking about these things. So I strongly recommend everybody go and support him in every way you can, whether sharing his stuff or giving him whatever support you can.
Well, thank you. As are you, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you.